Hello?
Wait.
Oh, fuck, Phil. What?
If Sriram's going to be here for the whole thing, we should just do the standard thing we do after popular fight cards, and we should lead off with the Conor McGregor stuff.
I guess you're right.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, why not?
Because, no one cares about
RDA.
It's true. That's true.
Chiesa getting another win over King's MMA.
That's true. My thought process originally was that he might not want to stick around for the whole show, but yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that means you're committed, Sriram. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. All right. Well, then, welcome. After being so rudely interrupted, welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is the incredibly impolite Phil McKenzie. And we are both honored and overjoyed to be joined today by yet another member of the infamous Vaping Scooter Gang, this crew of rowdy young fight analysts under the evil tutelage of Kyle McLaughlin over at thefightsite.com. We are joined today by Sriram Muralidaran, whose name I know I slaughtered, and who is still very graciously joining us for the duration of today's episode. Sriram, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. In lieu of vaping, I'm actually in the middle of my room standing on a Razor scooter in honor of this great nickname you've given us. So, yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So what we're going to do on today's episode is Sriram is basically joining us to just break down all of what we saw at UFC 246. And then we are going to be looking forward to next week's card. Surprise, surprise. You've never encountered this format on an episode of Heavy Hands before. Next week, we have Curtis Blades versus Junior Dos Santos in the main event of UFC. I don't know how we even refer to these anymore. Raleigh. And we've also got Rafael dos Anjos, a particular favorite, I think, of Sriram's, who wrote the article on thefightsite.com when he was ranked, I think, number 13 in their top 20 fighters of all time. And he's taking on Michael Chiesa in a very interesting welterweight bout. So we'll be talking about those two fights later on. But first, UFC 246. It's the order of the day. Conor McGregor did precisely what he was expected to do to Donald Cerrone, who did precisely what we ought to expect him to do, not only against a fighter like Conor McGregor, but just in really big, meaningful fights. It was the most predictable outcome possible, which does not stop a myriad of fight fans online from crying fix, because all of them somehow swallowed the UFC's hype about, and were shamed into thinking this was a close fight when Dana White lambasted them by saying they were disrespecting Cowboy Cerrone by everyone immediately predicting that Conor McGregor would win quickly. Well, thoughts on the matchup? Did I just say everything that's worth saying? Sriram, what do you think, my friend?
Yeah, pretty much. I think I said before the fight that if this was any closer than Cerrone Dos Anjos 2, Conor would have to reconsider going forward. And even I didn't really expect a prime McGregor to do Cerrone this way, because I figured it'd be like, kicks him in the body a few times, waits for him to do his terrible boxing stuff and just like bombs him. But Cerrone just came out and killed him. This fight was only ever going to say anything if it was Conor struggling or Cerrone somehow randomly looking good. Mm-hmm. And it didn't do that. It was just the most predictable thing. It reminds me of an article I read one time about Fujita and Cro Cop, where it's like, imagine if like the GoBot that turns into a scooter just got immediately stomped by Devastator. It's like, that's what's supposed to happen, but it's not supposed to happen in a way that was so predictable. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Phil?
Yeah, I mean, so the narrative of this main card, and to be honest, like, it was even at the time, it was kind of, the main card was a sort of notable step down from the prelims. Like, when I had a few friends around to watch the main card, and as soon as Modafferi Barber was finished, I was like, oh, all the interesting fights are done. And the main card was sort of telegraphed by being entirely fights that went exactly the way that you would expect, just in a very slightly weird way. Mm-hmm. So Conor McGregor polished off Donald Cerrone in one round. It was just a bit weirder than we thought it was going to be, in that McGregor like shoulder bumped him a bunch of times and then kicked him in the head. And you're like, oh yeah, I would have expected it to be slightly different than that. It's still not interesting, but it is slightly different. Home Pennington managed to be even more boring than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Like,
even more boring than the first fight, that is to say.
It's disgusting.
Yeah. Even considering the first fight and who they are, they still managed to put on an all-time stinker and easily like our first candidate for a something of the year in the most boring fight of the year. Alexei Oleinik got a slightly off-kilter submission against Maurice Green, but it was an armbar. Brian Kelleher, I sort of would have expected him to. That fight was going to go one of two ways, and it went one of two ways. And then Ferreira fought Pettis, and instead of reusing his plan for Tysonov, he reused his one from Nate Diaz's plan for Pettis.
Yeah,
which was
interesting choice.
The most impressive thing about that was someone actually managing to keep Pettis' back. Has anyone actually done that?
No.
Yeah. So that's the entirety of the UFC 246 main card, basically, as run down by Phil McKenzie. Can we finish off the main event real quick? What else there is to say? Like, Donald Cerrone. I guess what I really want to do is like counter this notion that it was obviously a fix. Like, I have no doubt that some fights in the UFC do get fixed. And I think, historically the best way to fix a fight is not to tell one of the competitors that the fight is fixed, namely the person you want to win. If anyone's seen the movie The Setup, you don't want to fix the fight without telling the loser. But like, this was exactly the way that Donald Cerrone loses to fast starters, pressure fighters, and power punchers in general. It's also exactly the way that Donald Cerrone loses really big fights. Like he has a reputation for kind of shitting the bed when the stakes are really high. And I remember last week on the Vivi on Bloody Elbow that Zane Simon, that fucking bastard, Zane Simon was saying that he thought. I'm excited, by the way, as the show goes on to get Sriram on the Zane bullying. He was taking some comfort or was taking some hope rather, from the fact that Cerrone was talking about how he was basically claiming to be the only man on earth who knows nothing about Conor McGregor's fighting style. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably true to the extent that Cerrone doesn't know anything about anyone he fights because he just doesn't pay attention. He just burns all of his money on skydiving lessons and then needs another paycheck and comes back for it. But that has never mattered in the past. Donald Cerrone has always more or less been that guy who doesn't pay attention to what his opponent brings to the table. And yet, against Rafael dos Anjos, what are my other examples here?
Darren Till.
Against Darren Till, against Anthony Pettis, that was a big deal, number one contenders fight at the time. And against Nate Diaz, which was a big fight that had a lot of pressure and fan interest. All of these fights, he has come out and been cowed by the aggression of his opponent. He just doesn't deal well with that kind of pressure. And he doesn't deal well with the normal kind of pressure we discuss on this show either. So, You know what fight this is actually reminiscent of to me? It's not because in some ways it wasn't the sort of southpaw pressure dynamic, but it is a great example of him catastrophically shitting the bed. It's his first WEC actual title fight against Benson Henderson, i.e. their second fight. Because it's pretty similar to that, and they just had some exchanges, and he was just like, man, I need to change levels on this guy. And he just got instantly guillotined. Yep.
And this was this was fairly similar in that, he was clearly trained for the left hand. He slipped the first one, hooray! And then immediately tried to change levels. And then just sort of didn't seem to have, he looked overtrained rather than he looked overtrained and nervous rather than organic or anything like that. I mean, but yeah, there isn't much to say about it. It was weird and short and also predictable.
I think it was a weird fight in that, because before the fight, and I think everyone in the know sort of laughed about this, where Cerrone's coach was like, "Oh yeah, Conor's just a left hand." It's like, "Oh yeah, everybody says that," and like no one actually tends to fight like that because they know that McGregor has like some really good tools to herd people into that. But then you had Cerrone biting on that southpaw double attack, the thing that Crow Cop does, without the left hand even actually being established. So he was immediately like slipping hard to the outside, even though all Conor was trying to do with that head kick was just like keep Cerrone from moving around and slipping in the future.
Yeah.
He just like leaned hard into a flicking head kick and domed himself. It was the dumbest thing ever. So I think, yeah, it's Cerrone not knowing much about Conor's fighting style. It's Cerrone's usual liabilities. And it's just, I think Cerrone, like, he's probably reaching shot territory, even though this fight didn't say much because he never wins this fight.
Yeah, I just think, the only way he was ever going to win this fight was getting out of the first 2 rounds and McGregor slowing down drastically, which was still just as real a possibility as it was before the fight. Conor McGregor came out extremely hard. Who knows how long he could have sustained that kind of fight. But, yeah, I do think that's kind of funny that, we've seen left high kick knockout from McGregor at least once before. And it was a switch up that I think he used with some serious success in his win over Max Holloway. We know it's a tool in his arsenal. I do think it's kind of funny, like you said, Sriram, that he, and I tend to agree with you, Phil. Like it looked almost like he was overtrained. Like he was so ready to deal with probably the one thing that his camp had been built around. And this has been a truth about Cerrone's head movement ever since we saw it improve over the last couple of years, is that it is kind of guessing. He's still not that comfortable a defensive fighter. It's like a, shut your eyes, wince, and just get under the shot right now kind of thing. It's not a cool, relaxed trigger of the like that we saw from, say, Drew Dober on this night. So, it happens.
The benevolent Chad.
Yes, the benevolent Chad, Drew Dober. Okay, well, there's the main event. Conor McGregor got the result he wanted. He got the big PR push he wanted. I don't know how many people bought this, but being online has already revealed that far more people than I would have liked to believe think that this is not, in fact, a fight designed for Conor McGregor to win. But he won it in exactly the way he would have been expected to win it, just slightly faster and slightly weirder with the immediate impact of those shoulder bumps, which again were even more effective because from the moment the fight began, Donald Cerrone was essentially cringing and hoping that it wouldn't hurt too much and that it would be over soon. The co-main event. Oh, God.
Let's
the co-main
not.
event. Yeah, can we just not? Yeah, it was bad. Holly Holm, I guess the only lesson I would want to impress on people listening regarding this fight is that having good balanced footwork is really important, because if winning a matchup, if you're like Raquel Pennington, if winning the matchup depends on following your corner's advice to press forward and throw shots, you really want to be able to do that without falling into the clinch every single time. Especially when your opponent is Holly Holm, and she has almost entirely traded her meaningless leaf blower kickboxing for a style built around incredibly tedious cage control and clasping her hands and just pushing you into the fence and landing even more meaningless close range strikes. Is there anything more to say, Phil?
Yes. I will, friend of the show, the Naked Gambler, has sent me this on Twitter, is that Chael has put out a video saying Holly Holm has the best cage control in the sport.
What?
Which is just tremendous. And I genuinely have to respect his hideous, vile hustle. Yeah. And immediately in the deck for the link, it says the first thing is lose weight now, and it's got his weight loss regimen thing. It's it's tremendous.
Chael is actually a decent analyst too. Like, you know, it is a hustle. He does know what he's looking at least in some respects.
Yes. But it's so
always been the thing with
deeply
Chael.
Entwined.
Yeah.
In the trash.
Yeah.
That. What's the other thing? Yeah. So we're going to presumably be talking a bit about Drew Dober because this was one of the interesting things on the card. Even though that was pretty brief, but it is sort of really illustrative to look at Drew Dober and Holly Holm back at sort of similar points in their career when they first turned up in the UFC and started making noise, in that these were sort of two baseline athletic, strong, like hardworking people with sort of, leaf blow kickboxing styles. And then, they learned how to wrestle and to be more comfortable in their in wrestling exchanges. And Holly Holm used that to become, to change from being one of the most boring fighters out there to being perhaps the most boring fighter out there, and just pinning people into the cage with her head. And, Drew Dober used it to become pretty cool. And it's just been like an interesting evolution. That's what you can do with a baseline. Like, if you've got the physical talents, you can really make something of it. And Holly Holm, it was clearly partially that she just didn't have the boxing talent to make this work. She's had terrible boxing trained into her. She was visibly a worse boxer than Raquel Pennington the first time they fought. And you know what? A weird thing is, I'm not even sure Holly Holm won this fight.
Right. Just the same as the first one.
But it was so bad.
Yep.
I remember the only parts of it I watched because I was just on a Skype call with a couple of friends actually. But it was the only parts I watched was Pennington kind of getting like double collar ties against the fence and like a really, really bad RDA impression. And this is going to come back later. But it was like Holly Holm was holding her against the fence and Pennington was able to just like get her forearms in. And all it showed was, and Pennington wasn't doing much, but all it showed was that Holly Holm, for all of her enthusiasm at controlling the clinch, she's just not that good at it. And there's no reason to expect her to be because it's like a tacked on addition to just not feeling safe at range.
Yeah. And really it seemed that the vast majority of her success in the clinch was a factor of Raquel Pennington not having any sense of urgency to get out of those positions, because she was able to reverse her way off the cage in that 50-50 over-under position over and over again. They just kept spinning around like watching a fucking loading wheel, right in the middle of the screen.
Beyblade and quarter speed.
Yes. And the other thing is that Holly Holm is really big and strong. Like, she's still a physical beast. So, if you let her clasp her hands and crush your underhook, she's going to be able to leverage up on her underhook and turn you into the fence. And if she's just like, I will say this, like, I have always had immense respect for Holly Holm's, incredibly workmanlike attitude towards fighting. Like, she is, I don't mean this to sound like a backhanded compliment, though it absolutely will. But like, she doesn't get bored of what she's doing. And there are a lot of fighters that you can't say that about, that they can't just stick to an absolutely dull game plan. Or they aren't content just plugging away at the same, like, 2 or 3 ideas forever. Like, this is how she fought when she was a boxer too, when she was in like, I don't know, or women's boxing champion fights only 10 rounds. And I know their rounds are only 2 minutes, but even so, she would spend like, half an hour or so just doing the same shit. And that's how she wins these fights. Like, her opponents get bored or confused or they lose focus, and Holly Holm just stays perfectly focused on doing the terrible, awful thing that her team has always prepared her to do. So there's your co-main event. I guess we should take a break before we move on through the rest of UFC 246. As we said a couple times, the prelims were really where all the intense and exciting action really was on this card. So we are probably going to try to move on into that pretty quickly after segment 2 kicks off. Of course, before we break, I do want to introduce a new tradition. we have to end each segment of the show by reminding our listeners that The Gentleman will be in theaters this Friday. Critics are hailing it as a return of the gangster comedy. Now say it with me, guys. All hail the Gentleman.
All hail the Gentleman.
All right. We'll be back after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are moving on through UFC 246. I will nearly summarize the rest of the main card. Alexei Oleinik versus Maurice Green. I actually got an absurd amount of enjoyment out of this fight. I agreed I agreed with Joe Rogan when he was criticizing the drunk crowd for booing during the middle of it, because there was, in fact, a lot of both drama and comedy in the back-and-forth battle for Alexei Oleinik's 2 or 3 specialty submissions. I had fun. Brian Kelleher, one of 2 things was going to happen in that fight. One of those things happened. The main card opener, I think, is the one really worth talking about here. That's actually interesting. Carlos Diego Ferreira, or as he is now typically called on the UFC broadcast, simply Diego Ferreira, was kind of expected to beat Anthony Pettis by being all of the things that Anthony Pettis hates, namely a dominant top position, or rather control position grappler, someone who gets to a superior position and then maintains it, a pressure fighter, and someone who is able to cut off the cage and fight at a high pace. And was it you at the top of the show, Phil? Did you say that he weirdly replicated Nate Diaz's approach instead of the Rafael dos Anjos one we were kind of expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I was expecting him to just do what he did to Tyson off.
Lots of jabs, right?
Uh-huh. And yeah, instead it was the sort of the tie walk into the clinch.
It seemed that his preparation that was intensely focused on not giving Anthony Pettis an open stance fight. That seemed evident right from the beginning, that he just didn't want Pettis to have enough time to set up those open stance body kicks and head kicks that he likes to throw. And otherwise, yeah, it was kind of weird. Like, it worked. The thing is, having just reviewed it, like, I didn't really enjoy the approach live. I find it harder to critique it now, having seen it twice, because it really did work. It got him into the positions he wanted to get to, and clearly his plan was just to not bother striking with the dynamic Anthony Pettis. He was confident in his ability to out-wrestle and out-grapple him, and he did both of those things remarkably well. Sriram, what did you think?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I think it's something that Ryan Wagner mentioned before the fight, that CDF could struggle given the fact that he kind of just follows people around while pressuring, that it could be something like Alan Jouban versus Mike Perry, where Jouban just like controls the lead hand and punts away, and that's 100% Ryan, by the way. But the fact that he denied the open stance kind of kept that away from him. And yeah, I mean, the path to beating Pettis, if you're actually comfortable being on top, is to wrestle him. And CDF did that to perfection. Pettis, he's growing more fragile, and there was that little worry between rounds where like he was getting his leg massage, and it's like, oh god, this again.
Yep.
But I mean, he is who he is at this point, and guys are just more used to figuring him out. It's like Cowboy, but he's probably better than Cowboy at this stage, I think.
Ooh, I don't know if I agree with that. Although if you were to run back a fight between them, I do feel weirdly confident that Pettis will be the one to win. But I agree with your assessment of the fight. Like, I thought the most impressive and obviously, given the way they wanted it to play out, the most effective aspect of the whole thing was Ferreira's wrestling. I was really impressed with like just the sheer relentlessness of his wrestling game. I like to see fighters who will shoot and run their opponent into the fence be so like proactive and aggressive in the clinch positions. Like, we still see so many MMA fighters today that are very neutral and passive. Jesus Christ, we just talked about Holly Holm versus Raquel Pennington. And yet when Carlos Diego Ferreira got there, he had like a specific order of operations for what he was going for. He got to the clinch. He had a nice underhook. He fought to control Anthony Pettis' wrist. Once he had wrist control, he stepped behind his leg and destabilized him a little bit. That was basically just a ploy to get around and switch from wrist control to the body lock, or the rear waist cinch. And he did a great job, like attacking the legs with one of his legs and then using that to switch to the double. He had the really clever back take that I think is becoming more common in MMA, where people will get half on the back and then use the wall to kick their opponent off balance and secure the position. Like when he caught a body kick in round 2, basically the definitive takedown of the fight, he was just super persistent in taking that single leg up high and just running after Pettis and not giving up on the takedown, even as Pettis showed tremendous flexibility and balance and didn't go down right away. He just stuck to him. And that matters.
I think you could look at something like Jacare Blachowicz too, where a lot of top level grapplers, they aren't actually that good at wrestling. It's also what makes Gilbert Burns very fun to watch, is that he knows what he's good at, but not only does he know what he's good at, he can try it and actually succeed. And that's one cool thing about Ferreira, is that not only is he like a really good anti-wrestler, as he showed against Rustam Habilov, he can also, when he needs to do it, he can get down in the trenches and like clinch it out, take down it out, whatever he needs to do. And I think, like, as I said before, you can appreciate versatility even if it's not that fun. It's the sort of thing that you can look at with like Darren Till versus Kelvin Gastelum in a broad conceptual way.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, maybe not the approach I was expecting, but obviously a very effective one. And I think the real lesson here, like, this is the thing to know about Anthony Pettis, basically the thing we've known for a while, but his fundamental flaw is his footwork. And this fight just proves, like, even if you don't take one approach that obviously works well against him, if you can work with the basic fact that any amount of concerted pressure is going to put his back against the cage, you can then just kind of do what you want. You can take any number of paths from that point. And the lesson is, fighters out there, develop your footwork so that you don't just get put against the cage the moment you meet someone who doesn't want to take a step backwards.
Fighters out there, just be Edward Vartanian.
Yes. Phil?
You could see him trying not to do that at the beginning of the fight. Like, he was trying to angle off and throw strikes as he was doing it to get off the cage. But it's like Cerrone's boxing. It's not very deep, and it clearly mentally exhausts him, and he just reverts back to pumping out the old 1-2 and trying to kick people on the way in. And, it just erodes too fast. Yeah, it's not going to work against any, like, elite fighter who just wants to do it again and again and again.
A lot of talented fighters like Pettis who basically spend their whole career just trying to train out the bad habits that they developed in their first half of the career. So
yeah, I think he should try and I think Ferreira should call out Makhachev. He should just keep going with his Dagestani Devastator approach. He should go for the Betchko hair taking out the Four Horsemen thing. He should just try and take out all Khabib's countrymen.
I think that's a great move. Just take out all the guys that a lay fan might casually confuse for Khabib Nurmagomedov at a long distance until basically people just have to see you fight the real thing. Okay, so there's the main card. Let's move on through the prelims now, where the actually interesting stuff happened. And boy, does it really stand out in retrospect. Looking at this entire ESPN preliminary card, like, this was great. This was a great night of fights right here, these 4 fights. Everything was exciting and meaningful and dramatic. They were just action-packed, fun, interesting fights. And the featured prelim here was a massive surprise. Roxanne Modafferi defeated Maycee Barber. There was a traumatic knee injury, which was dealt with in a very confusing way that I do not approve of. And I don't know why we had to see all 3 rounds of this fight, to be honest. But the important thing is that before that knee injury, Roxanne Modafferi was already beating the brakes off of Maycee Barber. She had the right approach. She was technically superior. She was calm. She fought brilliantly. Phil, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, Roxanne has to be, I think, as Jordan Breen said on Twitter, she's got to be, like, this, perhaps, with the sole exception of Tim Sylvia, the most unathletic, successful MMA fighter, like, ever.
More so than Jake Shields?
Yeah, she's more unathletic than Jake Shields, for sure.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Like, you just saw her coming to the cage and, like, taking off the glasses and squinting, and, like, you're just like, man. I mean, and she's getting slam KO'd is one of the great, like, indicators of unathleticism. Like, I've always said it's the kind of does spaghetti stick to the wall thing. Like, do people stick to the floor when you throw them at it? It's generally an example of them being kind of noodly. And we've seen that, relatively recently by her just getting, bullied by Jennifer Meyer. So, yeah, it was great to see her, like, establish a technical edge and then sit on it and then just expand it to everywhere in the fight. She was like, oh yeah, I'm a way better striker than you. And we'll talk about the idea of being like an invincible prospect when we get to Nasrat Haqparast, who's, you've got that unbreakable prospect confidence. But the thing is that Barber was so defense deficient, and her solution to, like, that when she fought Aldrich had just been to just storm after her, that it was just getting her pieced up. And then Modafferi was like, oh, yeah, I'm actually, like, I've worked really hard on my wrestling, and I'm still a pretty good grappler, and it just all fell apart. Like, even without the knee, yeah, she just got owned everywhere.
Yeah. So before the fight, it was Maycee Barber at like minus 1,000, and it was kind of crazy given that Maycee Barber was like, she looked very, very vulnerable against JJ Aldrich, and was also in general, like, she'd never looked good enough to where I'd be like, she should be minus 1,000 over a literal heavy bag.
There are so few fighters who should be minus 1,000 against anybody. Certainly not Maycee Barber.
It's like, to be minus 1,000 over Roxanne Modafferi, who's, like, at the very least, I'm not a big fan of Roxanne Modafferi, but she's hard not to respect because of all the stuff you guys just said. It's like, you need to be at the very least functional, and if not, like, probably even more than that, you need to actually be good, and you can't be getting boxed up by JJ Aldrich. It's just not how that works.
Yeah, I find myself really impressed, actually, with Modafferi's striking. Like, all things are relative in fight analysis, and I know what Roxy's striking used to look like. And, like, she just had basically, like, a modicum of fundamental technique, and that was enough to win the early striking exchanges very clearly. That she changed direction and moved laterally after she struck, which forced Barber to keep coming after her and changing direction, didn't allow the bigger, like the so much bigger and clearly more powerful fighter in Barber to plant her feet and swing. And she did a really nice job of, like, feinting her way into range and stepping offline to land the right hand. And, like, yeah, all of this was extremely effective because, as both of you guys said, like, Barber just doesn't have the technical wherewithal to deal with it. She was in there just trying to kind of guess at counters, like winging a big hook as the person comes in is a classic, I don't really know how to strike that well MMA fighter move. That gets a lot of young fighters knocked out, and a lot of, like, way more athletic fighters tend to get away with it until they fight someone who just sets them up and knocks them out later in their career. That's basically it. Like, I think it was still clear that Barber is, like, she is a serious physical specimen. Modafferi is not, as you guys said, like, she might be the worst athlete to have achieved this level of success in the entire sport. So the contrast looked even more pronounced. But there were a couple moments here, even after the knee injury, where Barber was just able to hulk her way to top position on the ground. There were a couple moments when her knee was totally compromised, where things looked like they were getting pretty dicey for Modafferi, even though she was landing all of the most meaningful shots on the feet. she still had to be wary of exchanging with a limping, crippled opponent because Barber had that much more power than her. But Modafferi fought like a really smart fight. She did exactly what she needed to do with the tools she has been given. And I always like seeing that. I found it to be very dramatic and very gratifying. Anything else to say before we move on?
Nope.
I'm good.
All right. Well, this is one that we were really looking forward to. Sadiq Yusuf and Andre Fili. I think a lot of people were seemed to be surprising themselves with how close they saw this matchup coming in, with how much trouble they were having in picking it. I know I certainly was. And the way it played out, that feels like it was a valid period of indecision, because it was actually very close. And Sadiq Yusuf clearly has some major problems that can be exploited as he continues to fight an increasingly difficult array of top-ranked featherweights. Sriram, what did you make of his performance?
I enjoyed it a lot. I think it's more impressive than it's going to be given credit for that he out-jabbed Andre Fili, because Fili's been doing a lot of stuff lately with just it's not like a power jab the way Sadiq was throwing it, but just playing with reactions and stuff. Mm-hmm. And Sadiq just stormed out of the gate and tried to take his head off before he could start, playing with it. It's kind of like what Korean Zombie did to Moicano, where if you just bomb them the first time they try to set up the jab, it's probably going to work, mm-hmm. because they're not feinting it anymore right now. But I think Fili fought a generally good fight. Mm-hmm. He just got screwed in round 2 by hanging out in the bottom too much, but Yusuf's top game looked good. I liked when he went southpaw. He got scared off it in round 1 when Yusuf countered a kick, but then he went back to it round 3 and it worked well. Both guys are good. I think Yusuf's takedown defense is probably going to be a problem.
Phil?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we said that Yusuf had to do in this fight, he had to jab more. He needed to, if he was going to pressure, he needed to jab, at and with Fili to push him into the fence. Because that was a lot of what, I think the other thing that made it work was he needed to low kick, but to his credit, maybe he recognized that better than we did. He might have just opened himself up to reactive takedowns, because, mm-hmm. as Sriram pointed out, he ate a ton of those anyway. So I think it was a smart fight from both guys. So I think Yusuf's grappling was, I think, encouraging in a somewhat Adesanya versus what's-his-face way. Mm-hmm. In the
old what's-his-face, we know.
Yeah. In fact, both of his early fights, the first one against the guy who's two dudes, who's the guy who tried to wall and stall him,
Wilkinson.
And then the second one, and then the one against, God damn, why am I forgetting everyone's name today?
Is that Marvin Vettori?
Vettori, yeah. It looks pretty promising. So, yes, you could see that he's actually pretty dangerous and pretty hard to shake from top position. He did a good job of just controlling Fili and keeping him down there. He obviously had a major strength advantage.
Yeah.
That Kimura sweep that he hit in the first round to basically win the round was, that was nice technique, but also something he only could have done if he was at strength parity or advantage. But yeah, so I thought it was a good strategy. I thought, Fili fought a good fight as well. As I said, it seemed like him really sitting on the southpaw, combined with the fact that Yusuf just seemed a little out of gas in the third, mm-hmm. meant that round was pretty decisive for Fili. But he wasn't winning by that point. So yeah, I think it's a great fight. I think both of them have bright futures. I think they just matched up really well, and they did on paper and they did in actuality.
Yeah, I do have a couple concerns with what we have now seen out of Yusuf in 3 fights. He did a great job. Like Sriram said, he basically just it was more of a mental victory, I think, than a technical one. It was just a good, smart sort of gambit to play. In the opening seconds, once Fili wanted to jab, he just exchanged hard jabs with him and then nailed him with another hard counter. He wanted to stop Fili from taking a lead with that weapon and like establishing a long distance sort of fight, and put some pressure on him right away. But honestly, by about halfway through the first round, Fili had found his jab again, and was landing it pretty effectively. And then he was landing both his right-handed jab and that lead left at a southpaw in round 3. Round 2, he mostly spent on his back. But I don't like Yusuf's stance. This might seem like a really quibbly sort of thing, but these things, like fundamental technical problems, they matter. And Yusuf fights,
too square, huh?
Really, really square. Like, the hands are outstretched. And I thought this was like maybe an adaptation because of the pressure we've seen out of him in recent fights. But in round 3, he defaulted back to that more like Woodley-esque counter-punching style that we saw in his Contender Series fight with Mike Davis. And yeah, he's really square. He is really wide open for those straight punches off of either hand. And I just don't like that. You know, I don't know. It's an MMA specific adaptation. A lot of people feel they have to be square to fight off takedowns. You know, I get that, but it's good to know how to pull back into more of a like back foot bladed stance at times. I don't know. Like clearly the square stance in and of itself was not stopping Fili's shots. That was a matter of setup and timing, that he was able to throw the quick jab or throw a feint upstairs and then just hit a really well-timed shot. So in my mind, like, why not? You know, Jose Aldo didn't have a square fucking stance. Like, why not give your opponent a smaller target?
I think the square stance, it could work when you're like moving forward and really proactively being defensive.
Sure.
It's the sort of thing that Rumble Johnson did really well, is
Sure.
that he could like walk forward square and like parry everything, and just, you know, it lets him move side to side really well. And if Sadiq actually manages to get like a really, really good pressure game, that could help him. But yeah, the square stance hurts rather takedown defense a lot, especially when Fili was shooting them with like really good timing and just like trying to get him even more squared up just reactively.
Right. If your hands are going to be up in a high guard while you're square, you kind of lose a lot of the advantages of a more square wrestling stance. Like,
yeah, I mean, Fili could just like blow through him and just knock him over.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I question that. I agree. It makes sense when you're pressuring, but you got to pressure. If you're going to stand like that, then you got to be Mike Tyson. You got to be Joe Frazier. Like, you have to be taking advantage of the lateral movement that stance affords you, the ability to generate power with hooks. Once you're on the back foot, like, it's a problem that Shane Burgos often has too. Like, once you're no longer just pressing the person backwards and you are in a more reactive phase, then like, you don't have to just give your opponent your face as a target all the time. Like, just stand in a way that they can't touch it whenever they want to. So I don't know. I found that to be a little troubling.
Yeah, I think it's, as you guys sort of alluded to, I think it's a good stance if you're a lot more handsy than he was. And he is sometimes a quite, handsy fighter. He's like we mentioned, like both him and Fili like to kind of play with the hands and then kick the other guy. But we didn't see that much from this one. But yeah, if he's not like proactively catching strikes with his hands, trying to bat them away, if he's not like, playing with the ability that, your hands are pretty close, so you can land, a right or a left hook around the side or a jab. Or
like getting lower and coming in under strikes side to side, like.
Yeah, it does tend to make it. It's also like not just takedowns, but also it obviously does open like the entirety of your body to things like body jabs and body kicks.
In striking, you hide your center line, folks. You gotta hide that fucking center line. You don't want to just expose it. As for Andre Fili, I found this to be a pretty good anti-pressure performance from him. Like relative to what we've seen in the past, there were a couple moments where he wasn't like making careful reads. Like when he very slightly dropped Yusuf in round 1, I don't know. I found that to be, he like was trying to back Yusuf off with his jab. He got nailed with a hard shot. He started moving his head. And then he moved it a second time in quick succession while still throwing. Like, he wasn't seeing everything that was coming, but he was making good rote responses in the midst of an exchange while moving his feet, while moving his head, while throwing like a varied combination counter that was effective. And then otherwise, I thought he was doing a pretty good job as the fight went on of like fencing Yusuf off with his jab, throwing slip jabs, throwing quick jabs, every once in a while stepping in with a more weighty power jab. I think like it's clear that Fili's game is blossoming at this stage in his career solely because I think he's like becoming a more fundamentally technical striker. He has a lot more depth to a game that is much more pared down than it used to be. You know, he's not in there doing quite as much crazy shit, and it has allowed him to weather storms that I think he would have had to rely a lot more on just sheer durability to weather earlier in his career.
Yeah, it was great and like great fun to watch, but yeah, it did also feel like as I said, like a very big, like it felt like an even bigger physical mismatch when they were in the cage than it was on paper. But the way it technically played out, because Fili got however many takedowns, and every time Yusuf was just like, "No, I'm just going to stand up," or "Oh, I'm actually on bottom position now. I'm just going to kimura you. Look, I'm on top now."
Yep.
And then when he got top position, that was just it. Fili was just like he could not stand up.
Yep.
Basically, and, that might be due to urgency, but I also suspect it's just that like Yusuf is way bigger and stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't super confident in it, but basically the reason I picked Yusuf, I felt like I was defaulting to him, but it was because I was like, he hits way harder. He seems stronger, and that does seem to be, like, in my mind, the main factor behind how the fight played out. Because otherwise, Fili was really in it, except for that second round when he was just stuck in bottom position. All right, well, that's basically all of UFC 246. Anything that you didn't hear covered on this main episode, check that out on the Heavy Hands Patreon. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, next week's card happening in Raleigh, in North Carolina, the main event, Curtis Blades versus Junior Dos Santos, and then the co-main, Rafael Dos Anjos taking on Michael Chiesa. Those two fights after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are now moving on. UFC 246 is officially in the past. It is behind us, and looking onto the horizon, we see a pretty dog shit card, if we're being really honest. UFC Raleigh, aka UFC Blades versus Dos Santos, was really, really promising. Like a pretty damn solid card, not a couple of weeks ago. The first, I think, major pillaging was when Frankie Edgar got pulled from a fight with Corey Sandhagen, which was a great matchup. I would still be very interested to see. That was supposed to be on this card, and then he went to replace Brian Ortega in order to get absolutely owned by Korean Zombie. Good move, Frankie. Maybe you should have fought Corey Sandhagen. We also lost, let's see, Josh Emmett was supposed to fight Arnold Allen. And Nadna Armani, one of my personal favorites, I think a very fun, like, well-rounded, hard-working regional type who finally got to the UFC. He was supposed to fight Nick Lentz, and he also had to pull out of that fight. So now Nick Lentz is fighting Arnold Allen in a ill-advised return to featherweight that no one cares about. The whole thing just kind of sucks now. But the main and co-main are still interesting, and that's what we're going to talk about. Let's jump in first on Blades versus Junior Dos Santos. Sriram, do you have any preliminary thoughts?
My first thought is that the odds are a bit too wide, considering that Blades is at like minus 300. Because given everything I've seen of Blades, like he's dominating in where he's good, he's really dominating. But he's also seemed vulnerable in more than a few fights. Like I'm pretty sure Shamil hurt him with an uppercut, and I like Shamil for a heavyweight. I'm pretty sure everyone who's talked to me on Twitter about heavyweights knows that like Shamil, I have a soft spot for him that I shouldn't, but. At that athleticism difference, you shouldn't be getting hurt by Shamil. He got his head kneed off by Alistair Overeem. Mm-hmm. He got bombed before he could even start wrestling by Francis Ngannou. I think there's a better than...
Mark Hunt nearly knocked him out.
Oh, yeah, I totally forgot about that. But, yeah, there's like a better than, I'd say like a 25% chance Junior Dos Santos just comes out, beats him up inside a minute. There's nothing really stopping it until Blades starts to wrestle. So... And what makes it worse is that Blades is really, really rote offensively on the feet. Mm-hmm. In the sense that, like, Francis Ngannou, I don't consider Francis Ngannou like a really good counterpuncher. He's just like powerful and able to like fling fists around because he's, a heavyweight and people fall for that. But he was able to time Blades' jab really early because Blades' jab is kind of terrible. So... There's a decent chance Blades loses, but I think I'll have to go with Blades just on being younger and, Junior Dos Santos looking kind of dire lately.
So what I want to say is, I want to say two things. My tradition of just holding out hope, for fighters like way past their obvious expiration dates. Nowhere has that served me better than in the heavyweight division. When it comes to predicting fights, I just kind of assume that heavyweights just don't change for better or worse. Very gradually, they tend to lose that athleticism, but people just stick around in this division forever and can have terrible runs, and then you just put them into a favorable matchup, and they just win it the way they always would have. And I bring this up because Junior Dos Santos, statistically, has a fantastic record of wrestling defense. Probably the best of anyone Curtis Blades has fought. Certainly the best of anyone that he's beaten. He's got a higher rate of takedown defense than Overeem, certainly higher than Mark Hunt. Shamil absolutely can't stop takedowns historically as well as Junior can. And I'm not sure I think I want to talk about like how often Junior has really been called on to defend like a powerful shot wrestling attack. I don't think it's very often. That's not really common in this division. So maybe Blades has an edge there. But I think there's a significant chance that Blades just doesn't get Dos Santos down. All that easily, at least. And the last time that happened, he almost lost, or at least looked really bad, against Daniel Omielanchuk, who is much smaller and nowhere near as athletic or powerful as Dos Santos. So, I don't know. Phil, what do you think, man?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with JDS is that he's one of those fighters, where at some point you go from being the guy who solves the IQ test to being the IQ test. Yes. And JDS is the IQ test.
Yes.
Like, his solutions over the years have been notably dire to all the things that he's bad at. Just like Anthony Pettis, they've, came up at kind of the same time. And, I mean, JDS's solutions are even worse, but he's had less of an issue because he's in a worse division.
Yeah. Oh, Cain Velasquez held me against the fence last time. What I should do this time is assume that's going to happen and try to throw wacky elbows. One of my favorite adjustments for a rubber match ever.
His insane, confidence after he loses fights.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great idea to throw that punch against Francis Ngannou. It pretty much almost beat him.
Yep. It was all going perfectly. It was all going swimmingly all the time in Junior Dos Santos' mind.
So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like about JDS's chances. He's still got a really good jab. I think Blades can probably, to some extent, just jab with him. He's got super long arms. He's still really tough. But, he doesn't necessarily want to be stuck in that kind of exchange with him. JDS is a super hard leg kicker when he's not being backed up.
Yeah.
But I think this time he'll be too scared of the takedown. I think he is one of those guys who will make that kind of change. He's just going to be like, oh yeah, and I'm going to counter the wrestling. But, you know, we saw against, like, he hurt both Ngannou and Stipe with low kicks.
Mm-hmm.
I think he knocked Ngannou down with a low kick.
He knocked Mark Hunt out with his Achilles tendon.
Yeah.
He's got very powerful legs.
But on the other hand, Blades is super coachable, and we saw against Overeem what, like, waning athleticism differentials can do in this kind of division. You know, Overeem just looking a bit too slow and not as physically strong when it came to stopping the takedowns just meant that he just got absolutely blown off his feet. And JDS is still just way too prone to back himself up into the cage.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of one of those things where he can defend 2-3 takedowns against the fence, but if he doesn't defend like the fourth, then that's the round gone, and that's him taking damage. And I no longer trust him to come out on top of cardio or just like cardio exchanges or to have his chin hold up anymore.
Yeah.
Like I just expect him to back into the fence too much. And like I said, just Blades is one of the good things about, you know, it's the other side of being rote. He's super coachable.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just going to be like, oh yeah, you know what to do in this one. You know, you just push him against the fence, go around the side or the back. Don't try and just switch to a double leg because he'll fight you off. Do what Carlos Diego Ferreira did, and, you know, just keep doing that until you win.
Yeah, I do think that's probably been a really good sign for Blades. Is his chain wrestling and mat return game has been like a major part of all of his big wrestling victories ever since that loss to Daniel Omielanchuk. I'm not 100% sure, but I tend to think that is maybe a response to what happened against Omielanchuk, because he seemed uncomfortable against a southpaw. His shots didn't work the way they wanted him, the way they normally did, the way he expected them to. But he has been just a lot less reliant on the shot succeeding to get people down ever since. Getting around to rear waist cinch, lots of tricky mat returns, blocking people's legs and tripping them over backwards, changing direction, all those kinds of things. He's particularly good at doing those things for a heavyweight. I don't feel super confident, to be honest. Like, if, like Sriram said, if Shamil Abdurakhimov can feint you into ducking into an uppercut, then damn sure Junior Dos Santos can do it. And, you know, he still hits super fucking hard. He's still got very quick hands. He also has a great jab. He throws his jab to the body. Like, if he executes these things intelligently and correctly, he absolutely has the kind of striking game designed to keep a shot entry wrestler like Curtis Blades off of him and pick him apart and wear him down over 5 rounds. But I also don't really trust his durability. I'm not sure how much I trust his stamina either. And I just think that Blades doesn't need that first shot, that initial takedown attempt to succeed the way that he did back when Omielanchuk made him look bad. But who knows, you know, like, as this fight plays out, I think it will actually be very interesting. I think there are some layers to this matchup that I am eager to see.
Yeah, I'm going to say Omielanchuk went to ACA, so right now, retrospectively, I like him because he's in ACA and we have to stand. But I think I agree with all of that. I think JDS has never been the sort of like massive cardio drop-off threat that everyone else has been at heavyweight.
Yeah.
Just because, you know, he's mostly a jab and he can do that sort of thing for 5 rounds, even if he looks kind of meh, like he did against Blago Ivanov.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think I just have to trust that Blades just does it athletically. And as you said, there hasn't really been a heavyweight who can just like knock people over the way Blades does. So maybe it's just a thing for heavyweights, the way Aldo can just be latched up by anyone.
Right. Please don't remind me. I beg you not to bring that up a second time. Yeah, I tend to agree. I think Blades has a wrestling game that is like uniquely suited to heavyweight, just because like no one else does it. Like no one's game is designed to deal with it. But that being said, like if JDS can fight off takedowns, even if he gets held against the fence for a while, as long as he doesn't get taken down and let Blades start building momentum, pounding him from top position, then just having a game that doesn't rely on being fresh is also super meaningful at 265, and like he could start to take over late in this fight, or he might be just as likely to just knock Blades out in round 1, walking him into an uppercut or something. So we will see, but there's certainly enough Francis Ngannou in what JDS does to give me pause regarding Blades' chances. That being said, I think we're all 3 picking him. Is that, Phil, you picking Blades as well?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, let's move on to the co-main event then. Sriram, I want to let you lead off on this. You are, at this moment, the resident Rafael dos Anjos expert on the crew. I think this is a pretty exciting matchup, but also one that I would assume we're all favoring RDA to win. But you wrote you did a fantastic write-up of sort of the workings of RDA's game and how it's evolved over the years for the fight site. What do you make of him at this point in his career and in this matchup in particular?
Yep, it's me, LRDA respecter. But yeah, I think there isn't a ton to say about this as a fight, honestly, and like you could just go through this as more a reflection on how welterweight's being booked and how RDA is being booked, because Michael Chiesa is not a threatening fight for RDA. He just isn't. If you watch the Pettis fight, he gassed in like 1 round. Mm-hmm. He got knocked down by a punch to the shoulder there. Beneil Dariush actually beat the crap out of him until he got tapped out. Legit just destroyed him. And Beneil Dariush is like 1/2 of RDA in every single way. So I think, Michael Chiesa is not the sort of opponent who should be beating RDA. He's not the sort of opponent who should be beating anyone who plays a dedicated attrition game, because he's at a camp where attrition is explicitly just ignored. So I think it's more useful to kind of look at this as like RDA's career, and I said this in the write-up, which you should read because it's a good site, and I just want to plug myself. But it's the thing about RDA's career is that it's always been like successfully courageous in a way that no other career has been. If you look at someone like Michael Johnson or Donald Cerrone, they tend to wear down and get figured out fighting the sort of schedule that RDA has been. Mm-hmm. And RDA kind of hasn't. It's like the sort of blandness to him has hid how unique his career really has been. So it's the sort of thing where like, he, lost a few times at lightweight, went up to welterweight and actually worked his way up. That's something that's very rare. And getting this sort of gimme matchup, it's not going to do anything for him. And it's kind of infuriating both from RDA's perspective and from the perspective of why is welterweight giving Michael Chiesa a shot off beating Diego Sanchez?
Well, I don't know if you realize this, but Diego Sanchez is in a highly anticipated co-main event coming up soon.
That's the co-main event?
I'm pretty sure it is, when he's fighting Michel Pereira.
Oh my God.
Let's see. Yes, it is the co-main event to Anderson versus Blachowicz.
That is a dire card. I thought this was a dire card. That is a dire card.
It's the SpongeBob Voice co-main event to the SpongeBob Voice main event on that card. Anyway, please go on. So as for the fight, there's not much to say. RDA is generally capable against southpaws, so he can just leg kick Chiesa to death. Chiesa, he's more of like an Oliveira type grappler, where his grappling defense is a lot behind his grappling offense, so he can get tapped out by like Jorge Masvidal. Mm-hmm. So you're going to get like Chiesa trying to generate the offense they did against Beneil Dariush, but against someone way better at wrestling and way more trained against wrestlers, as we saw over the last few years, way more athletic, way less of a gassing threat, probably even a better grappler. So it's going to be ugly from a Chiesa standpoint's perspective. It's going to be beautiful for me. Yeah, I even think that was like a dynamic that sort of played out in Dos Anjos' first fight with Donald Cerrone. Like, Cerrone is also a very like offense-first submission grappler. His ability to throw up quick submissions and chain them together is what has like created scrambles that have allowed him to escape bad positions on the ground. And otherwise, most of his grappling success has been hurting people on the feet and then finishing them quickly while they're still disoriented. That game from Cerrone didn't function at all against RDA.
Also, Nate Diaz.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And Diaz, I think, might even have a more like sophisticated ground game than Donald Cerrone, a little deeper, and it just doesn't work. Like if you concede top position to RDA, it's over. He's an extremely good top position grappler. He's also a very punishing top position player with his ground and pound. Yeah. I mean, it feels like a pretty easy Dos Anjos pick, to be honest. Phil, do you have any thoughts on it?
So, I mean, Chiesa is a guy who has generally made things work by waiting for people to walk into the area in which he is dangerous. He is he's just a willing striker, but he's not a really effective one in any particular way. He's just going to he's going to put a lot of heat on his strikes, but largely he's just going to wait for the fight to end up in the clinch, and then he's going to try and overpower people there. And he's got like a nice back take and submission game. He's got a decent gas tank for who he is. For his approach, he's one of those guys who's just going to sort of throw himself at the opponent until they get tired out. But we've seen him get worked in multiple ways, which indicate that Rafael dos Anjos is a terrible matchup for him. Not only is the fact that like Dariush was carving him up with leg kicks before he managed to somehow turn it into like a scramble and tap him out. There's also like, does anyone remember how lackadaisical he looked in the clinch against Joe Lozon?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up if you didn't, that he cut Joe Lozon with an elbow that ended up securing the victory, but otherwise he was kind of getting worked in the clinch by Joe Lozon.
It was the cut stoppage from Joe Lozon, yeah.
Oh, right.
Joe Lozon TKO'd him.
Right.
Because he just started landing unopposed knees from the double collar. Sorry, the Thai clinch. Just in case Ed is listening. And
I still use the term Thai clinch. Everyone knows what it means.
Yep. And body, the historic Rick Little vulnerability to body shots, and just more the fact that, like, in his last fight, in some ways, it's moderately impressive to beat Diego Sanchez, even nowadays, by out wrestling him.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, but also, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Because that is implying that you are a very bad striker.
Yes.
Like, the much safer, easier, and better thing to do for almost any modern MMA fighter would just be to knock Diego Sanchez the fuck out. And, like, he's a big, relatively young, fighter in his prime. He should be a good enough striker to knock out Diego Sanchez. And he is not. Yeah.
He probably is, but he also
doesn't have the confidence.
Yeah, and the reason he doesn't have that confidence is because he technically, this is what you were saying, Phil. He also isn't, like just by virtue of youth, and like size, he probably did have what it takes to just knock Diego out. But technically speaking, like the man's striking has really not gotten better ever. It's basically like there was a period, I guess, when he fought like Masvidal where he suddenly had enough confidence to let strikes go. But ever since then, like when he doesn't have a reach advantage or the opponent knows how to deal with that reach advantage, there's just not much there.
I think you could say that Chiesa is like, even if he didn't have a big power advantage, he could probably knock Sanchez out. It's just that Sanchez almost got knocked out every moment he was on the feet with Craig White. So that's a low bar for being a functional striker.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, Dos Anjos. I think really like the question here is how would you like to see him do it? I'm not sure that RDA has always been, the word I've always used to describe him, sort of what I think you were getting at before, Sriram, is professional. He's like, he does these really courageous things in a way that doesn't seem courageous because he's just like stoically going about his work. He like thrashed Anthony Pettis for 5 rounds while wearing the facial expression of a man doing his tax returns. But he does have the temperament where he will change up his approach, do something specifically for an opponent. That being said, his style has definitely shifted in recent years. So given that this is the first really favorable style matchup he's had in a while, do you expect him to come out and look to pressure Chiesa into a takedown? Do you expect him to try to keep it on the feet and just carve Chiesa up with low kicks, which would obviously be an effective tack?
I kind of feel like this is a booking like Conor Cerrone, just, with people that no one cares about nearly as much, where RDA needs to impress really big to get out of this looking even remotely good. So I think, you're right that his approach has shifted at welterweight. I think it's mostly because he's been facing much bigger guys, and it's hard to like physically bully them and like push them back when you're tremendously undersized the way RDA was against like Kamaru Usman. Right. So I think the last big like pressure performance he put together was Tariq Saffiedine. And Saffiedine's good, but then after that he pressured RDA, or not RDA, he pressured Robbie Lawler when Lawler's knee was already, gone. So I think RDA, he should come out pressuring. Chiesa's not a good, he doesn't have good footwork, really. Like, he was backed up by Pettis just shifting towards him near the end of round 1. So he could pressure and leg kick him. He could basically do whatever he wants in this fight. I'm ideally like a second round TKO where he just beats the crap out of him. That's ideal for someone who likes RDA a lot.
Sounds fun. I like RDA, and I agree. That sounds great. Phil?
Hopefully he gets Woodley and takes him to the woodshed.
You know what? I'm really interested in that fight. I'm glad you mentioned that. I will be dreaming of that if RDA gets it done in impressive enough fashion here. Phil, final thoughts?
I feel like there's only one way people should try and beat Rick Little fighters, and that is like Dutch style, low kick to body shot combination. Yeah, like that specific combination. I'm not happy until I see someone do it.
Please throw that fucking body shot combo you put on Robbie Lawler, RDA. Oh. If you're listening, put 1,000,000 hooks on the body of Michael Chiesa. I'm begging you.
He destroyed Saffiedine's body. I'd like to see that.
Yeah. He could do it in the clinch. He could do it in boxing range. He could do it from long range with his kicks. Hit the legs and body. It's all I want. All right. Well, that is it, I think, for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. I think it was a great one, in large part due to Sriram from the Fight Site joining us. Sriram Muralidaran? Oh, fuck. I'm really hanging myself out there every time I attempt.
Nailed it.
Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, do you want to tell the people anything you have had come out recently or have coming out in the near future? Plug your shit, please.
So for February, I've got something on Benavidez Figueiredo, which is a better fight than Tony Khabib, in my opinion.
It's a great fight.
I think I've got something coming out on Beneil Dariush soon with so half of RDA, that article. Mm-hmm. And, just follow the entire site. Everyone there is really smart because, we just are. It's the vaping scooter gang. Vaping makes our brains grow. So
Kyle McLaughlin can smell a smart, young, promising fight analyst a mile away. It's one of his great talents. So yeah,
it's all that vape smoke.
Yes, it's really easy to smell, you guys. To be honest, you reek of mango jewel. But so make sure you check out those pieces from Sriram on the Fight Site. Phil, anything you got coming out this week?
Just the preview. So, it's the excitement of, I don't think we're actually going to be previewing RDA Chiesa because, that's a fight for nerds. So we're going to be previewing the real fight that people care about, Blades dos Santos. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant Alan Lentz.
We're going to be previewing Bevon Lewis versus Daquan Townsend. Jamal Hill versus Darko Stozic. Man, this card is really loaded with
Dick
fights.
Kicker extraordinaire and the guy who popped for cocaine. Let's go!
Woo! That is so awesome. Well, I've got an article in the works, but you know my new rule. I don't mention it on the show until I've actually written it. So, just to play it safe, make sure you keep your eyes glued to bloodyelbow.com, where you can also find Phil's previews with David Castillo. And otherwise, find us all on social media. You can find Phil on there at Evil Greg Jackson. Sriram, remind me of your handle again.
It's just SRIRAM and says. I was kind and didn't make you guys spell my last name.
Beautiful. So at Evil Greg Jackson, at Sriram M Says, and of course you can find me at Boxing Bush. And we'll catch you guys next week. Oh, by the way, make sure you check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. There is more UFC 246 that did not make it into the final cut of this episode to be found there, including our friend Sriram.
Oh yeah, forgot to plug. Fight Site Patreon's up too, so go for that.
I cannot have competing Patreons on this show, okay? People only have... Our audience is absolutely dead broke, okay? They can't support two different fight Patreons at once. But yes, check out the Fight Site on Patreon as well. Thanks again, Sriram, for joining us. And
thanks for having me.
We're very happy to. And until next time, if you all listening came here for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
The fanny does not mean the butt.